Good afternoon, everybody. I never know where to say good afternoon or good evening because it's afternoon for me and evening for Maggie.
Evening for
But
me. Hello,
in any case,
everybody.
hello. Welcome back to Other Minds and Hands. This is episode number 98. And today, Maggie and I are going to return to Narnia, as we promised, to talk about a bad adaptation, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which pretty much everyone I've ever... I don't think I've yet met a person who loves that movie. Um, so...
I found quite a few people online that love that movie,
Really?
just in
Okay.
terms of memes and pictures and stuff. And I can't say I loved it, but I was like watching it. I was like, oh, I'm really excited to talk to Corey about this because I don't hate it.
So yeah, I thought it was quite bad, but it didn't feel like an adaptation that it felt like it should be better than it is. Like it
Yeah,
deserves better
it totally
than it
deserves
is.
better, but it also didn't incite rage
No,
like
no,
other
not
adaptations
exactly.
have. It was just kind of, oh,
Yeah.
you know, which is a real shame for like this book because it's probably this and The Horse and the Boy are probably my favorite in the series.
Oh yeah, me too. Those have always been my top two. Horse and His Boy first, Dawn Treader second. Have
Mhm.
always been my top two favorite Narnia books. Absolutely. I think it's one of the problems. But anyway, I also am really looking forward to talking about this. I have lots of ideas. Um,
Yeah.
and I think I can see some reasons why it's a bad adaptation. But before we get too far into that, I wanted to do a brief announcement and remind folks about subscribing at the Collaboratory. So hang on a second. Let me shift myself over here. There we go.
Yeah, because we never really talk about this other thing that we do. So
Yeah,
it's kind of
which
nice
is
to
pretty
drop it
cool.
in here and be like, oh, by the way, there's a lot of other stuff that Corey and I do besides this.
Exactly. So the Signum Collaboratory is the place where we make available all of the content, all of this premium content that Signum is producing. We have the books that are under production at the Signum Press. We have video projects that are in production with Signum Studios. We have fan tracks. We have hundreds of hours of recorded academic lectures from the Signum graduate program and from Space. And in addition, you can also get access to all of the things that people have submitted for publication as well to be a part of that process. So in the Collaboratory, this is in our circulation library, where things which are in a more or less complete state. I say more or less complete because things like my book, for instance, right here, it has several finished chapters. I have published 7 of these chapters so far here in the Collaboratory. But of course, the book itself is not done. So you can't get the book in the store because the book isn't ready to be sold publicly out in the store. But you can see all of the chapters as they go. So the stuff in the library is stuff that is like ready to be viewed, but many of them are part of ongoing projects, and even our lectures, even our lecture series, are often sort of released as they're being edited and prepared for release. So even some of those you can see kind of as they go along. And one of the really cool things about the Collaboratory interface. So these are all just for viewing. So these aren't for downloading. These are just for viewing as part of the subscription. But you can also make comments on them. So we go through and we look at, or this is the audio version, and you can add comments. So this is how you can be a part of discussions, and you can also be a part of, as I say, even our submission process as well. This is just the stuff that's in the library. This is just the stuff that's sort of ready. But the other really cool thing, so just like getting access to all this stuff, and there's really a whole lot of stuff that you get access to. But in addition, there's the project rooms, which are where things are being, so like kind of behind the scenes, where things are being planned and prepared. So for instance, like in my project room for my book, as I said, there are 7 uh, uh, chapters that have been circulated, but here you can see this is the rough draft of my chapter 2.2, chapter 8, which is not yet been released, and my outline for 2.3, which I'm writing right now. So and there's Maggie some fun studios projects that are going on in
Yeah, if
project
you want
rooms
to
also.
If you want to pull up New Bedification,
Yes.
um, that's a good example, I think, of just some of the work in progress stuff. So, New Bedification, we're about to have our first episode, finished episode, come out, but it takes, I mean, this is a year in the making for this series to really take form because we have to get New Bedi in the studio. He filmed like 14 segments. We then go through all that footage, see what you want to use, how you want to use it, get the feel of things, get the art styles of things, commission an artist to put some pieces together. Then we started talking about music and who's going to do the music, so all these pieces start to come together. But you're part of all of that.
Right.
So the first thing was rough cutting all of the footage. So our editor went through and just did rough cuts of everything. So you can actually go through and see just the raw footage of those things with the ums and the sneezes and stuff cut out, and kind of put your own thoughts and comments in there. And then the next edit would have art over top of it. And the next edit would have titles over top of it. And monthly, we're meeting with New Beta in his creator circle. And we'll look at different clips and we'll talk about stuff and be like, oh, I like the vibe of that. I kind of want the font to be a little bit different. Do you think you could drop it down? Do you think you could cut it in? And so
Yeah.
really like talking about the different styles that we can do with this. And that's just one project. So
Now
that's
we
New
can
Beta
talk
going through the Silmarillion in his way. There you go.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
explaining it in the way only New Beta can, which is pretty fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
it
then we've
is.
got a couple other projects going too. Corey and I are working our way through Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy slowly, a little bit faster than you're working your way through the texts, but
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit.
we are working
Yeah.
our way through them. And then we've got Hip Hop and Tolkien, which is a conversation between Corey and New Beta talking about hip hop and Tolkien poetry. And you can say something about that if you'd like, but
Yes. Yes.
it's a pretty great series.
It is really fun. I mean, I think, and it's funny because beginning this series really has led me to a much deeper conviction of the fundamental similarity, the fundamental likeness between the poetic approach of hip hop and Tolkien. It's really, really fun, and it's been really, really neat talking with New Beta about this because he is, a Tolkien guy like me, but he is also a hip hop lifer, and so being able to talk to somebody who he gives me so many insights into hip hop stuff that I don't know about, and it's really fun to kind of combine that with my own sort of more academic look at the prosody of hip hop as well. Anyway, so that's been really fun. And this project, the Conversations with Verlin Flieger project, is a really exciting one.
That's probably our, I don't want to say flagship, but it's obvious it's a different kind of project and it is huge
Yeah.
and fantastic. So we captured about 8 hours of footage with Verlin in her home over a couple of days in Virginia, and just have clip upon clip upon clip that we're now stitching together. So creating a narrative around what she was talking about and putting together some footage of her home and making a cup of tea. So we've got this B-roll stuff that you're kind of cutting into the absolute nuggets of genius,
Oh, it
and just
was.
the sweet, sweet stories.
Yeah, this is one of this project was conceived with just the desire to
Capture.
get a camera and just get Verlin Flieger talking and to be able to hear from her own experience, her own thoughts about Tolkien, and so much wonderful stuff there. So yeah, really, really fun watching this unfold. So there should be videos that'll be available for purchase soon, but in the meantime, you can join and be a part of the project room.
I will say there is another project in development that I would welcome feedback from you guys too. That we are looking at past episodes of Other Minds and Hands. We have one spec happening already that we'll probably release more widely just so everybody can see it. But taking episodes of Other Minds and Hands, editing it so it's a little bit tighter, and putting an overlay of the films that we're talking about, the artwork that we're talking about, and turning it into more of like a 1 hour standalone piece without any,
Yeah.
YouTube adverts or anything like that. So we will look to have some of that on here as well. And same with Rings and Realms, if you guys watch that, bringing Rings and Realms onto Collaboratory, so you can watch all of that without any ads. So we'll have a ton of content coming out
Yeah.
on this, both already filmed, like the YouTube episodes that we're kind of adding to,
Right.
and studio-based stuff that we're developing from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah. It is one of the sort of natural limitations of our discussions here at Other Minds and Hands is that we are talking about visual stuff, but sometimes we can get, slides and see stills and things, but we would love to be able to do more like viewing of clips and connecting more directly what we're saying with what we're seeing on screen. But YouTube and Twitch make that very difficult to actually stream any clips like that. And so being able to have a space where we can actually put that together is really fun. But yeah, so the Collaboratory, the base subscription to the Collaboratory is $9 a month. So it's pretty cheap. And I said, it gives you the opportunity not only to get all access to all of this really cool academic and fun fan content, but also to be involved in the process and be, advising on, the entire editorial and production process as well, and to be making comments and giving input into that stuff as it takes shape. So pretty fun. Anyway. So, go ahead.
And there's a ton of stuff in there. I mean, we've got fan tracks, audio tracks, we've got Michael Drought, we've got your book, we've got so much stuff.
Michael Drout's Beowulf, the Exploring Beowulf, that is just amazing. I mean,
that's epic.
He's got, as you see, the 4 screens worth or 5 screens worth of episodes. It's like 40 episodes. This is audio content that Mike Drought recorded. Basically, Mike Drought was just like, I want to do audio recordings of like everything I know about Beowulf. Essentially, he's been studying Beowulf his whole career. So it is amazing, line by line through the whole poem, as well as like a whole bunch of general lectures. Yeah. Really, really amazing.
I was going to say, the other one is the lectures that I would flag up. Everything that Signum's ever taught.
Yeah.
You have access to.
Yeah. There's some amazing courses. Plus, like all the new space stuff that they've been recording and releasing recently. All the way from the beginning. This Lewis and Tolkien class was like the second ever class I ever taught at Signum in spring of 2012, I believe. So there's stuff like this that goes way back, and then there's some stuff that's brand new that's just been done recently, and then there's stuff that's old and new, like the Lovecraft class here, which was recorded by Amy Sturgis years ago and then updated recently, Maggie, by you and Gabriel. So really, really fun stuff. All right, so there's so much material here. Like I said, the entire catalog is not yet fully available because we've been going through and editing it. We've been doing some processing of the entire catalog, which is a big project. It's a big project, but we're now, I think, over 50% has been moved in, so there's plenty to get started with as you wait for the rest. All right. Very good. So this is the Collaboratory at signumuniversity.org, and I encourage you to check it out because it's really fun. All right. But speaking of really fun, let's talk about let's talk about the Dawn Treader. So here's the first thing I want to say. I noticed about the Dawn Treader movie is that I'm not sure that they say the phrase Dawn Treader at any point in the entire film, or if they do, it's only once or twice, and I completely missed it.
I can't say I was looking for it, so I'm not. I don't doubt you.
Well, so that observation was kind of a secondary observation that I made. The first thing that I noticed is that what felt to me like a strange status that the ship itself has in the film. On the one hand, they did not cheap out on the boat. The ship is gorgeous.
They didn't cheap out on much when it comes to the visuals. Like, I was watching it, and my husband was with me, and the monster came up, and we were like, whoa. Yeah. Like, I didn't remember the detail of that. That's serious creature design.
Yes. Yeah, no, the boat's beautiful. The boat's beautiful. But, so, they obviously put massive amounts of effort into the boat. And yet, in the book, the boat is one of the primary characters of the story. Like, a very great deal of discussion happens about the boat and the character of the but they're always talking about the boat, they're always thinking about the
We
boat.
have a
We have
very
a map
detailed
of the boat.
diagram.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That Lewis's narrator is always talking about things like, for instance, the stuff that I used to love as a kid, like about how the galley is in the front of the ship because it's a sailing ship, and so the wind is always blowing from the stern, and so you want to put anything that's smoky or smelly in the front of the ship and not in the back of the ship. I loved that as a kid. So one of the reasons why I loved this book so much was the way in which the amount of effort that Lewis invests in getting us to invest our imagination into the boat itself. And when something bad happens to the ship, like when the storm happens and the mast collapses, or when the sea serpent is like damaging the ship
cut the
and
tail
stuff.
off.
They like it feels like a blow, like it's like a protagonist getting wounded or something like that. Like it's such a central element of the book. It serves as, I get said like a character, but it is the entire sort of frame of action. The action is moving from one island to the next, but the ship gives the whole book a home. The ship is focused on the Dawn Treader itself. While in the film,
It's not about King Caspian. It's about the voyage of the Dawn Treader.
The voyage of the Dawn Treader. Yeah, exactly. And of course, one of the things that happens at the very end is that Caspian is reminded that this is not about him, right? Like and that like actually going to, going forward past the edge and into Aslan's country to the utter east, as he says, is not Caspian's job. Like Caspian, that's not Caspian's quest, right? Even though to get there was the quest of the ship, the quest of the undertaking. But in any case, it really struck me in watching the film. And Maggie and I were reflecting, for both of us, this was like the second time we'd watched the film ever. Like, we both saw it in the theaters, and then
I don't even have a picture of it from
the
film.
ship. Yeah, well, it's not on camera that much. Like
That's crazy.
It's the set a few times, and it's interestingly, it's right in the foreground of each of these posters.
Yeah.
But it's
I want to talk about the posters, but go back to saying this is for each of us. This was only the second time we've ever seen that. I feel like that's an important point for us to bring up.
Yeah,
Wait, this is only the second time.
We've ever seen this. We both saw it in the theater and have never seen it since. And I have to admit, my viewing of it in the theater. So, this was a 3D film, wasn't it? It was like in the 3D
film
fad, basically. Yeah.
First of the trilogy to be 3D.
Yeah, and it was, anyway, like that was, I mean, folks will remember the Hobbit films fell right into the middle of that like 3D movie fad. Right. I get motion sick. And I will confess, utterly overcome with motion sickness.
Being on a boat in 3D.
The problem was the Reepicheep flying on the dragon scenes, the swooshy. I lost it. Yeah. Actually had to excuse myself from the theater for a few minutes.
So part of the film you saw for the first time.
There was a segment there I had never seen before. But anyway, so this was, I mean, I feel safe in saying this was an unsuccessful adaptation. I mean, there's no film out there that you won't find people who are fans of it, but in general,
okay, box office. So like financially, it made like 425 million, which that's a pretty good showing.
Right. It wasn't a disaster.
It had an interesting like development life too. So it's the first to be distributed by 20th Century Fox, because Disney didn't like how it did with Prince Caspian, didn't think it delivered enough, so they weren't super pumped to move on to Dawn Treader. And I'm pulling this from memories now, but it was, I think they had approved 100 million for a budget, and the director wanted 140, and Walden was still involved at this point, so they were going to split the difference and eventually just said no. But 20th Century Fox had originally bid on this and wanted in, so they took this up, which ironically now Disney owns. So they're back under the Disney blanket.
Though it's still not on Disney Plus.
It is on mine. That's where I watched it.
Not in America.
Interesting. In the UK it is.
That's very interesting. But here it is not on. I looked for it there because that's where I watched the first two. But it's not there. No, it's on Max here.
Oh, that's funny. So that's a rights thing. So Max still has it for another like 3 years or something. I forget what the statute is, but. And then there was like a director change. There were writer changes. So there was a lot of like development heck with this that didn't flow so well. And I do feel like you can see some of that. Well, but mostly I just feel like this suffered from the Hollywoodization of a good book. It's like they just tried to force a 3-act into this text.
That's my number one thing. Yeah. And that was done so strangely. Like it's so yeah. Okay.
And I was trying so hard to have like a clear brain about it. And I think I can talk very rationally about most of it and be like, I can see why they did that. I can see why they did that. But if I had no prior knowledge and I was just watching it, it would still be weird. So like, if you're going to make decisions, if you're going to change stuff, like it's got a track. And, you know, the sacrificial boat's going to Green Mist. Green Mist was not a big enough threat for me. So I feel like we should give some context.
Yeah, that was what's. Hang on, can we talk about these promo posters while they're here?
Yes, because I really want to talk about the one on the White Witch.
First of all, they're all weird. Like every single one of them is weird. The one
middle one I only saw a couple of places, but it was interesting enough for me to be like, I want to talk about that. And then the White Witch one came up as like, you can buy this as memorabilia, and I'm like, she's hardly even in it. Like, why is she taking up so much of the screen?
That is clearly the most misleading of all the. Return to Narnia with the White Witch?
With the White Witch.
Is the caption?
And she's only, correct me if I'm wrong, but she's only in like those 4 seconds of Edmund's nightmare, right?
Yeah, and he hears her voice another time. I mean, that's it. That's it.
And she's not in the book at all. We have mentioned the knife that killed her, right? And that's it.
Or with which she killed Aslan.
With which she killed Aslan. But that's it.
Exactly. So no, she is alluded to historically, but no.
But it doesn't usually warrant an entire poster.
No. And I will say, I did not object. In fact, I remember that, you know, Edmund's temptation was one of the things I kind of liked a little bit about the film originally. There were some things that they were trying to do that I thought were interesting and clever when I saw it in the theaters. But yeah, the idea Return to Narnia with the White Witch is just hilariously bad. And just in terms of marketing, you'd be like, why would you do that? Because one, if that's what's going to lure them in, they're just going to be pissed off that they show up and she's not in it. Exactly. I mean, it's like there is no upside to that poster.
No, there's no success here.
No. But I guess the primary take home from this slide is that Tilda Swinton has like a really good agent or something. I mean, really good. Similarly, the middle poster. So Peter almost didn't appear at all. Like, correct. He's alluded to a few times, and I found myself thinking, like 2/3 of the way through the film, have we even seen that actor's face? Like, in a live shot, we saw a picture that had him in it. So they used his likeness, but I'm like, did he? And I was like, no, we did. And then we did once. There was like that one when Lucy is reading the book, and doing the beauty spell. And there's that one sequence with Peter and Edmund.
And her as Susan.
Yeah, with her as Susan. That's it. Like that's
all we get.
That's all we get of him in the entire film. Susan is more of a presence because Lucy thinks about her.
And references her and talks about her.
And she, like the actress, actually had to do like 3 or 4
thing.
bits, you know, in that one, including like the flashback where with her letter, and anyway, there were a bunch of little places and stuff.
Interestingly, Eustace isn't even on this poster.
No, Eustace is not on this poster. Reepicheep is not on this poster.
Yeah.
Those are the two other
The
major
dragon's
characters.
not on this poster.
Right. Which, you know, if you had Eustace, that's forgivable. But also, the thing to me that is most weird is Lucy is the age, like, that's Lucy from, she's the wrong age.
Yeah, that's the wrong Lucy.
That's the Lucy of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Well,
not
now
even
I'm
the
wondering
Lucy
if
from Prince Caspian.
And like I would have said, is this fan made? But it has everything correct on it. I'm
Right.
like, I don't know. I'm gonna have to do some digging now, but all the content is correct. Weird.
Yeah. And the other thing, honestly, that to me is a little bit strange is the shield, the lion shield.
Yeah.
That's like
Taking up so much space.
taking up so much space. And why? It's not, it doesn't make any sense either as an artifact from the film or as a symbol. It doesn't really work. The one on the left is clearly the best of them.
The one on the left is the most prominent. It's the DVD cover. It's
Yeah.
the one that was in the papers. You know,
Yeah, that's the one I
definitely that
recognize
you
from
will
the
see most.
thumbnail on Max, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the other two are the smaller ones. They're less found. But yeah, I mean, even on the big proper one though, White Witch is still there.
Yeah, that's the one thing. To me, that's the one aberration. Everything else works. The prominence, I like the prominence of the ship, right? The ship in the foreground, and the waves, like it's an action sailing shot. I mean, I like that. Little cameo of the dragon juxtaposed with Eustace there is good. You know, Caspian looking fabulous. Yeah, the White Witch is weird. She does not belong there, but and yeah, whatever. Aslan, although Aslan is one of those topics I would like to discuss, Aslan's role in the film, which was like very marginal. I mean, I'm tempted to say Aslan's role in the film barely merits having his face be the largest on the screen.
Thing on there.
Except, like, I will give them credit for the fact that they know that, like, the face of the lion like that is kind of like the Narnia trademark. So that's fine. I can, you know,
You can work with that.
I can work with it. It makes total sense. I mean, it's utterly defensible, unlike, you know, the far right. Wow, crazy. Okay, all right.
So before we dive into it, I feel like let's just take. I don't want to talk about it. I just want everybody to kind of see what came before.
Yeah, the BBC one. Yeah.
The BBC one. So like this was combined with Prince Caspian, as we said last week, but it's just worth taking a look at. The whole thing's on YouTube. It's super abridged, but it is very faithful. You know how I feel about those words, but it is extremely faithful to the text.
It follows the book very closely.
It's low budget, but it's actually like pretty massive budget for BBC in the late 80s. I mean, they built this ship, and then after filming, the ship actually toured the UK. So when you do an image search, you find all these pictures of people like posing with the Don Treader and
right.
And so then we've got Warwick Davis playing Reepicheep up here in the corner. And this is Caspian grown up, which I quite liked these comparisons. And then there's actually a YouTube video of the original Caspian talking to Ben Barnes in preparation for the role. It's pretty funny.
Who's the actor who plays Caspian there?
And you were going to ask me that. And it's here written, but I forgot to change it to white. Sam something. I can look it up.
I feel like I know him. Hang on, I can look it up.
Like Sam Wesley or something.
Sam West.
I was close. Sam West. Yeah.
Wait, Sam West? Okay. All right. I definitely know him from somewhere, but I'm not. Oh,
I'm like,
of course.
There we go.
Sorry.
Samuel West.
All Creatures
like, if I
Great and
changed the
Small.
text.
He played Siegfried in All
Oh.
Creatures Great and Small. That's what I know him from. Okay. Yep. Gotcha.
There we go.
Just
There he is.
very, very familiar face. So I have the face thing. I recognize the face, and then I like need to
Yeah.
get it. Okay, so they introduced. So that's Eustace in the middle there on the left.
Yep, that's Eustace.
That's Eustace. Yeah.
Edmund, I swear, has a line and a half in the whole thing. I like it was like the third episode before I was like, has Edmund
Does
even
Edmund
spoken?
talk?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same with Lucy. I mean, she's certainly key to activity, but she doesn't say a ton. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I did feel like in this one, the voyage was the central character,
Yes.
the ship, the story, the purpose, the search. And then we've got a little outline of Aslan there, changing Eustace, dragging Eustace back into Boy Eustace. And it's very obviously a man in a costume, but it's actually like pretty good prop work. So it was fun to revisit.
Yeah.
If you want to see an original adaptation, that one's pretty faithful, pretty low budget, but pretty accurate. Enjoy.
Yeah.
This one.
It is. Okay. So I have
Some feelings.
yeah. Let's talk because we obviously from the very beginning of Other Minds and Hands, we've been talking about this question of faithfulness, right?
Mm.
But I feel like this is a really interesting example of where I kept thinking about Tolkien's phrase, that is the famous phrase that is often quoted from Tolkien's discussion. I'm blanking as I usually do. I never remember the names of the numbers of Tolkien's letters like it's a block I have. Whatever the number of the letter is where he's talking...
We'll forgive it because you remember every single word of the line you're about to recite. So.
Well, where he's talking about the Zimmerman script, where he's discussing the adaptation of his... I mean, it's a fascinating letter because it's like Tolkien discussing an adaptation. And there's a lot of places where, you can find lots of like grouchy professor quotes, that make him sound like he's just like totally anti-adaptation and really and really purist and stuff. However, one of the phrases that he talks about is that a film adaptation must be true to the core of the original, and like he was opining that it is the responsibility of an adaptation to be true to the core of the original. Now, whether or not he's correct about that, whether there is a real responsibility there, I mean, I don't know for sure that I necessarily... Letter 210, thank you. Yes, 210 is the letter I'm talking about. I'm not here to debate whether I believe Tolkien to be correct about like the ethical responsibility of the adaptation to be true to the core of the original. And I would also say, as a side note, people are, in my opinion, way too hasty to draw conclusions about what the core of the original is, right? Even if you agree that an adaptation needs to be true to the core of the original, you need to be there are so many ways to approach that question. And yes, Phil, the PPP guys love to talk, like they quote this a lot, right? They quote this a lot. But again, you've got to be really careful in assessing what the core of the original is, especially since I would actually say there are several different ways in which you can understand that phrase. What is the core of the... Are we talking about... Does that mean...
Plot points?
Right, the core plot?
Names?
Yeah, the core of the character identities? The core of, like, the values of the book? Right?
It's as vague as when people say to the spirit of the text. Well,
yes.
Okay, let's talk about
what
that.
Is the spirit of the text? Yeah, exactly. No, it's very... So I don't feel that saying of Tolkien's is... it is totally transparent, or that it like simplifies very much. But as I said, I kept thinking about that phrase when I was watching this film again, because I think of all the adaptations we've discussed, I think that this adaptation may miss the core of the original more profoundly than any other adaptation that I recall discussing.
Yeah. Let's chat through that.
So thinking about, I want to go back briefly.
And that doesn't mean it's wrong either. I feel like films can play around with it, but we're saying this is why it's a problem.
Yes. I think that one of the big problems of this film was that they I don't know. I almost just opened my mouth and said didn't understand the core of the original, but that's critfic. I don't know what they understood. All I can see is what they put on film.
Yeah.
And I will say what they put on film doesn't seem to me to reflect a very great understanding of the core of the original. But in any case, let me go back, for instance, one of the moments where I felt in our discussions we landed most usefully on a sense of like something that I would define as the core of the original was when we were talking about Christmas Carol. And when we were showing that one really fun discussion where we were showing that even something like the Blackadder parody of the Christmas Carol, which reversed everything, and made him convert from like a really sweet giving guy to, to have this awakening and become heartless and greedy and selfish at the end of the show. Even that captured the core of the original, as we were saying, like what mattered, what the core of the story was. It seemed clear. It seemed right. Was the conversion, right?
The A to B.
Yes, the A to B, the experience of starting off like locked into one point of view, having this experience, and that the particular kind of experience, right? To look into the past, present, and future and understand the ramifications of things, and then from that to emerge with a changed perspective. That seemed to me to be and again, that was a really useful discussion because I felt like when we looked at all the adaptations, there were so many things that were changed, especially when we were looking at the modulations and the, like the Doctor Who version and what was the name of that Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds? Spirited? Yeah. Spirited, yeah. Anyway, like looking at all of those things, the one thing which, and it's clear, like if you didn't have that, then it would fundamentally cease to be a responsible adaptation of the Christmas Carol. If you did an Ebenezer Scrooge story without a turning point of any kind, right, then you would have missed something, and I would look at that adaptation and say that's a failure.
The same thing.
Yeah.
And when we say failure, I think it's key to just kind of focus on the example of the Twilight that I give all the time. Then why call that an adaptation of this story? Because that's not what it is. The failure is not that it was good or bad or successful or unsuccessful. The word failure is a poor execution of the source text. And you've heard us talk about execution. Like that could mean a myriad of things. You can absolutely change the entire structure, the entire purpose. The A to B can go from B to A. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But why utilize the title if you're not going to work with what the core is?
Yes.
So the core for Don Treader is problematic, I think, for a Hollywood film.
Yes. Well,
because there isn't a clear baddie. There's not really a purpose. Like there's not a ton of pacing suspense.
So there's purpose, but
but not Hollywood purpose.
Exactly. Well, this is exactly. And whether it. Sorry, what I keep stumbling over in talking about this is that I'm trying really hard to avoid critfic. And just a little reminder, what critfic is when you're talking about a failure in something which is a failure or a blemish in a work of art, and instead of talking about that blemish, you immediately start making speculations or guesses about what the creators were thinking or what led them to make that mistake instead of just focusing on the mistake. So again, it's not that, I mean, if you want to speculate about what led them there, like that can be an interesting question, though it's purely speculative, and you will usually be wrong when you guess what other people were thinking or what motivated them, or anyway, the really important thing for the sake of like discussing the adaptation itself is to look at the thing. And that's what, so I'm trying to be really careful. But one of the things for which I'm grateful for this adaptation is that watching this adaptation again has helped me to really put my finger on what I think clearly is the core of the original. If you'd asked me a week ago, what's the core of the original to the Voyage of the Dawn Tread of the book, I might have said the same thing that am about to say right now. But after watching the film, I am like 100% confident. The core of that book is about, what that book is about the voyage to the east, the discovery of the edge of the world. The theme that comes up again and again is the drive to go and see and explore, that this human need to go past the next horizon and ultimately to reach the utter east, to come to probe to the limits of human possibilities, and by that to come into contact with the greater things that lie even beyond human experience and human abilities. Like, that's what the book is about. That's why the name of the ship is important. That's why the ship's name, Dawn Treader, like to tread the dawn, to walk, to go to the eastern edge of the world and walk where dawn itself lives. That's the point. That's the point of their journey. That's the chief point of their journey. Even in the book, Caspian himself, he's going to search for the Seven Lords, his father's allies. But in the book, he explicitly says that that's like a side quest.
It's like a thing he's going to do while they're on
this
quest.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was the thing that inspired it, right? That kind of provided grounds for it. Mm-hmm. Like, he took an oath that he was going to go find the seven lords who were his father's. But having embarked on that, they have this, what they all view as the higher purpose.
Yeah, and I love how they drive that in throughout the text too, because it was a sought after voyage that people were clamoring to join.
Yeah.
And then there was this like moment of doubt towards the very end when they knew they had to sail on to the very, very edge and maybe not return, who knew?
Yes.
And instead of like begging their crew who were tired and exhausted to stay, they were able to like spin it, and be like, you are in a place that, others
we can't just take anybody.
Yeah. We can't take everyone. So you're going to have to prove to us that you're the best, really making it very clear that is the purpose. Like, all we're here to do is this. Like, we're going to do some other stuff while we're here because we're explorers and we're adventurers. And I also like that they reiterated that Narnia was safe enough for the king to be able to go do this. Like, do you think that I would go away if I didn't leave good things happening at home? And, so it felt very like Star Trek, right? A Brave New World. Here we are exploring the outer bounds of what we know.
Yeah, and that is the story. And the achievement of that, the reaching of the uttermost east, is the climax of the story. Like, that is the victory at the end. That is the destiny of the plot. It's the destination of the plot, right? And it's one of the things that I find so fascinating about this book compared to the other Narnia books, is that the return to England by the English children protagonists of the story is, in my opinion, more fascinatingly integrated into this book than into any of the others. Because in Sticking to the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Prince Caspian, books 1 and 2, as I always feel obligated to remind people, which we've already discussed to some extent, both times we come to the end of the story, right? Like, the first one is about the freeing Narnia from enslavement to the White Witch, right? And the establishment of the Golden Age of Narnia. The second one is about Prince Caspian and the oppression of Prince Caspian and the restoration of old Narnia and putting Prince Caspian on the throne. And both of those times, once those stories are done, then it's like, and now, children, it's time for you to go back to Narnia. It's like just a sort of a separate thing. Eustace and Edmund and Lucy go in the final boat they are the ones, they and Reepicheep are the last ones to go out into the final East. They're the ones who achieve the end of the journey, and the end of their journey is to return back to England, right? Like, yeah. It's so the return to England is integrated. Like, there is a sense in which their final return to England is, again, it's not a denouement. Like, it's almost like the conclusion. It's fascinating the way that he weaves that in there at the end of that story. And I think it creates this really sort of interesting tension, which puts a very different kind of pressure on their return to England than the first two books do. I think it's really fun. I think that's really neat. But again, it's just, this is the story. This is what this story is about. And the film only nods to it a couple isolated times. The one scene that you've given there with Reepicheep talking about sailing off, he acknowledges it. He sings his "When the Seas Grow Sweet" verse. There's an inclusion of that element, but it is absolutely not the story of this film. Yeah. And it has nothing to do with the overall plot of the story.
Yeah, and it almost feels like you can hear the conversation around the development table. And we know that this had multiple writers. It changed partway through and things like that, where they're reading it. And they do have a knowledge of the text. I don't question that.
No, it's clear.
There's a beautiful honoring of the text during the end credits. They show all of the illustrations.
Yeah, the Pauline Baines illustrations.
I thought those were wonderful.
Yeah,
That was one of my favorite end credits. Yeah, it was great. So they have a real, I don't know, beauty about it. And I think even the prisoners in the ships, that's potentially stolen from Silver Chair, right? Like, isn't that a thing that happens in Silver Chair?
Wait, which one?
The captives in ships, the being liberated basically by
the liberation thing. That was just kind of totally added, basically.
Yeah, I'm like, we're gonna have to talk that through, but I read something that's where they took it from, and I'm like, you're showing me that you're making an effort. Sure,
sort of. I mean, it's very.
That's kind of where it ends, though, right?
Yeah.
Because then you can hear the conversation around the writers' table being like, no baddie, need a little bit of romance. What's our third act? And I feel like you could turn this into a classroom workshop and be like, here's what they did.
Right.
And I don't know that, again, Critfic, but I could turn this into a pretty strong exercise of how they turned this into a 3-act Hollywood film with a baddie. And that wasn't the point.
I remember thinking before this film came out, I had some discussions in which I said, I suspect that there's no antagonist in this book.
Right.
They're going to want an antagonist in the film. Can you have a film without an antagonist? Is that legal in Hollywood? Do they,
yes. You've got to be brave and try it, but of course you can. You can just have a slice of life.
Or, again, it's the, yeah.
Or the tensions come from other places. It doesn't have to come from a singular villain. But that's not what fit. I mean, this is 2010. This is right at the peak of the post Harry Potter. This is the year before the last Harry Potter came out, The Lord of the Rings. Percy Jackson came out this year.
2 years before The Hobbit.
A whole slew of stuff. Yeah, a whole slew of stuff is in this. So this isn't the time when they would take a chance, I don't think.
Right. But it feels like that... Yeah, Everett, I was just thinking about Star Trek. Star Trek 4, he says, is a good example of a non-antagonist film. Yeah, exactly. No, it is possible. I mean, I'm half joking when I said that, but I was still, but still, no, more than half joking. I mean, or rather, I was teasing them in making this film because, again, even when it was coming out, I was suspecting there's going to be an antagonist. My guess, before the film came out, my guess was that they were going to turn Koryakin, the magician, into the antagonist.
Yes, I thought that too.
They're going to make him like an evil mastermind,
Yeah.
you know, who would, and
Causing havoc
and I have to say, like, I think that would have been better.
yeah.
Um,
Because it also would have given us, yes, I mean, just talking about the villain, it also would have given us something tangible.
yes,
Giving me green smoke doesn't work in that respect.
yeah,
And I think we even talked about this before, but like green smoke is kind of this like, I don't know, it's kind of a vague, empty visual of baddie. So it's not useless, but we see it a lot in film for
it looks
like, oh,
dangerous.
it's an omen of bad. And I
Yeah,
mean, we even see it in Lord of the Rings. It's the army of the dead.
yes,
But the army of the dead is tangible. We have a thing that we can focus on. The fact that they are represented by a green mist is okay. We have this action happening. Like the green mist happens in a
right.
lot of different projects.
Though even
Just green mist,
yes,
I have a problem with.
though even in the Lord of the Rings, it's one of the most frequently, like the
Yeah.
intervention of the dead in the form of green mist into the battle is one of the most like it was one of the less successful visual effects in the film, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so
And we
okay,
talked about it with War of the Rohirrim as well. Like whenever green shows up, that's a villain kind of cue, and
yeah,
you see it a lot. Sure.
yeah, exactly. Um, let me do an exercise for a second. Forget the book. Let's just talk about the film for a second. And this element, the antagonist thing, right? Let's talk about the shape of the plot in the film, totally independent of the way, because forget the book existed. And let's
Great.
just think about the film 100% on its own grounds. My biggest problem that I had was that although there was an antagonist, the purpose of this story was to defeat the evil. Right? That was the purpose of the story, was to defeat the evil. Because and it was they tried to tie the two things together. So Prince Caspian was going out on a quest for the seven lords who were the allies of his father.
But really, just their swords.
Well, see, it turned out they didn't know that in advance,
Yeah.
right? But it turned out that the seven magic swords of uncertain origin that the seven lords had turned out to be instrumental. So it was like, it was destiny of some sort that he ended up going on this quest, because that turned out to provide him the key that was needed in order to defeat the evil.
The evil.
That's my problem, though. What's
Yeah.
the evil? Like,
Yeah.
who's doing the evil?
Right. So, like, great, there's an evil. And, like, you've defeated it, but are we not worried about who sent the evil?
Right, it's
Or was
totally
that the evil?
depersonalized. Like, evil happens, right?
Yeah.
Evil is generated in this spot, and it needs to be removed. But, like, sometimes they...
But it doesn't have its own origin story.
No, there's no origin
Yeah.
story or identity of the evil,
Yeah.
or even, like, a clear MO of the evil. Exactly, like what? So it's like sacrifice, like, so they sacrifice the people there in that top slide, right, in the Lone Islands to the evil. Does that work? Is that what the evil wants?
And
if so, what is
How
it?
do you know that was an
Yeah,
option?
like,
did the evil tell you that?
Right, did the evil make a demand for people? Are they
Yeah.
just guessing? Right, that like, hey, when we put boats full of people out in the island here get taken by the green mist, so maybe it must want people, and if we keep feeding it people, it will leave us alone. I mean, they could have just kind of inferred that or been guessing in some way, and like, oh, okay, that's possible. But and yes, JJ, I've been thinking about the Neville in The Magician's Nephew. Do you remember that scene, Maggie? I don't know how
No,
long.
I don't.
So Aslan said it's right after the animals have just been all created, so they've all woken up. Like, so all the animals are like, they're fun and they're intelligent, but they have no experience with anything. They don't know anything about anything. So Aslan says to them, an evil has entered into Narnia. But they mishear him, and they think he says it's a Neville.
Neville?
So they're like, where's the Neville? Like, maybe he's the Neville. We'll find out. So anyway, so there's like a lot of like comical misunderstanding about what the Neville is, and what. So JJ was pointing out that our discussion of this like vague Neville
maybe this is the Neville,
Maybe
you
this is
know?
the Neville, apparently.
But like you were saying, like if this is totally separate from the book, I would still have a lot of questions of like, this isn't a good villain
No,
because this
no.
isn't giving us anything to hate against, fight against, feel strong or valiant against. Like you want your audience to feel the qualities of a hero, right? Like you want to have them kind of overcome whatever they're encountering as well and bring them along on this journey. I have no attachment of fear or valiant efforts to overcome green mist that I don't know where
No,
it comes
it's okay. So it's really diffuse,
from.
right?
Yeah.
The antagonist is really diffuse, senseless. In this again, like it doesn't make sense. There's no like a backstory. An antagonist with a backstory makes sense. Like you know what that person
Yeah.
is and what they're doing and why. Even if it could in itself be senseless, right? Like that is to say, it could be somebody who just like enjoys senseless violence, right? But that at least that is something, right?
Yeah,
To
I mean,
work
like,
with.
and it could be the mist that makes them have bad nightmares, and that's just a terrible natural occurrence. But this isn't that. Like, this has its own will and
Right.
stops Edmund Eustace from putting the
Eustace.
last sword on the
Yes.
table. Like, it actually gets in the way. It hinders. It goes into your psyche and finds your individual
Right.
thing to freak you out with. Like, what is this?
Throughout the film, we are prompted to view it as having motivations,
Yes,
as being an active agent.
intelligence,
Yes, yes. That
calculating. Yeah,
perceives things and attempts to counteract things, as you say. Like it sees that Eustace is about to put the last sword on the table, and it tries to stop him doing it. Now, Seven Sons of Feanor makes a really interesting comparison to the Neverending Story and the nothing in the Neverending Story. I don't want to get too sidetracked on an analysis of the Neverending Story, but
why haven't we done that yet? Is my next
that's
question.
also a
'Cause
really good question.
add that to the list.
That's a fascinating example of a adaptation which changes the story tremendously, but it's a really good movie.
Real good
It's
movie.
a really good movie.
Yeah, and both are able to exist in the same space.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway,
The nothing.
the nothing, the nothing. But see, the nothing is explained. Like we have a sense of its origin and of its nature, right? We don't have any like where did this come from? Where it's yeah. It's spoken of as if there is a person working it, as if there is somebody who has
Yeah,
intelligence and motivations behind it, but we're never given any hint of
yeah,
what that is and what that might be. The other element that I found really fascinating, that I was really, really interested in when I saw it in the theater between bouts of nausea, was that the way they tried to introduce moral allegory,
yeah.
essentially. Like, so there's the whole like you will be tempted. And I'm like, oh, okay, temptation, right, great. Again, why
Why? By
morally
whom?
tempted? Yeah.
Or why?
And what is it like?
What's it
Why
hoping for an
why
outcome?
does it care? Like
Yeah.
why is it invested in making them do bad things, right? Like it's like if you succumb to this moral temptation, evil will win. How?
I mean,
Why?
and I
Like
guess if you wanted to look at the allegorical side, because this one is a bit overt with the, Aslan's line at the end and everything about
yeah.
making sure that you understand this is a
Yeah.
Christian allegory.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah. That's the one of the most overt elements, like
yeah,
in the book. Like
in
that's the
the, yeah,
place where Lewis most plainly points to, and again, it's not allegory even in the film. This is a little pet peeve of mine. Well, it's not really a pet peeve. I don't feel it doesn't make me angry. It's just because most modern people don't know what allegory is. So it's the point at the end of, he's not saying, Aslan isn't saying I'm a symbol of Jesus or I'm an allegory of Jesus. What he says at the end is I am
I
Jesus.
am. I
Like
have a different name.
that's a different, it's not an
Yeah,
allegory. That's not how
yeah,
allegory works. Um, it's a supposition, right? It's an imagination of a different world in which Jesus appears in a different form in that different world. Like, that's not an allegory. Nor anyway. But again, people don't understand the word allegory, and most of the time when I say to Christians that the Chronicles of Narnia is not an allegory, they think I'm denying that, like it has anything to do with
You're
Jesus.
No,
and I'm
you just don't know the definition of allegory.
Not the point. Anyway, but the temptation. But let me explain why I brought up allegory just now, because I thought it was really interesting when they introduced the moral temptation element, right? That the whatever the Neville, right, which is behind the black, or which is the black mist, or which is behind the black mist, or whatever. The Neville is going to tempt people, and if you give in to the temptation, then the evil wins somehow, right? When they introduced that element, which seemed to begin. Is it fair to say it begins here? Anyway, I first really became aware of it. Let me say rather, in Lucy's temptation to read the spell, the beauty spell, right? Mm-hmm. And that's there's legitimate moral temptation that Lucy has and partially succeeds and partially fails in the book. Like that's a dynamic there, with the reading of the book, with Lucy in the book as well. So okay, but then what I was interested in when I was watching the film was they then went through and took the other incidents, in particular the finding of the water that turns things into gold, and made that into like a moral allegory itself, right? Instead of just being in the book, it's an incident which does have moral implications and does lead them to almost get into a fight with each other, and there is like temptation that they have to overcome, but they are not. But it's not about. It's not itself an allegory, right? The way in which they kind of superimposed upon that scene, like this whole thing has been like orchestrated by the Neville in order to tempt you morally. Like this is all like the discovery of Deathwater, as Caspian names it in the book, the discovery of Deathwater is itself like it's a manifest temptation. It's just it becomes a kind of moral allegory at that time. Anyway, I was like, okay, well that's kind of interesting. Like that's different and weird, but kind of fun. Except again, there was no clear end point. Noticing how Ramandu's Island, and we never meet Ramandu at all. I don't even know why his name was used, because it's called Ramandu's Island and we never meet Ramandu.
Never meet that guy. Yeah.
Right. We meet his daughter and they give his daughter a name, which is great. Like she doesn't get a name in the book and deserves one. But though I can see why Lewis didn't. There is something, Ramandu's daughter, when we meet Ramandu, the star, and then we meet Ramandu's daughter, there is something like he's there. There's like a mythic sort of appeal, like a mythic weight to what matters is not like her personal name, like her status is like she's given this mythic status, and it's anyway. So again, I can see why Lewis did it, but I mean, it's good. I'm glad they gave her a name in the film. But I would have liked to meet Ramandu also, but whatever.
And I also hated that moment. It was like, I know we don't have a ton of love interest, but there was absolutely some flirting between Caspian and her,
which is great because actually, is in the book she marries him. Like,
I did not know that.
Yeah, they get married. They get married. Yeah. It's briefly alluded to at the very end, and then we find out that future wife.
Okay,
future wife.
Now that tracks, and I'm okay.
Totally justified. Totally justified. But
Easter
like
egg.
again, floating out there. If you don't remember that from the text, I can see why that would be. I mean, like, if I didn't know the book, I would have thought that moment was like, okay, so they brought in this random hot woman to have some very brief sexual tension with Caspian.
Right.
Just for this, like, for what? Like, the sake of 3 minutes of titillation in the middle of that scene, and then that's it? Like, because they never come back, they never allude to it, right? At least the narrator gives us a little bit of, and not only the narrator, there's that one moment, so there's heavy flirting between Caspian and Ramadu's daughter in the book. And then when Caspian is having his moment at the end of the story, when he's like, oh, I really, you know, he's determined he's going to go into the uttermost east and leave Narnia behind. And they're like, no, we can't let you do that. Lucy turns him around in part by saying, you did almost promise Ramadu's daughter that you would come back. And he's like, well, that is a good point, right? Okay. And then the narrator tells us that he in fact does come back, and they get married and all that kind of thing. You know, that's, but in the film, like, none of that later stuff happens in the film. Like, it, and this, to me, this was the other big weakness of the film. Again, thinking of the film just as film, not thinking about its relationship to the book. This is one of the things that I struggle with most when I'm watching a film that I know the book of well, and I have this like vague feeling that my memory of the book is what is like straining to hold the film together in my mind, right? Okay. I had this experience with the film of The Order of the Phoenix all the time.
Yeah.
I watched the film of The Order of the Phoenix, and I'm like, this is so fast and crammed together, and like, I'm following this with effort.
Yes.
But I feel like if I did not know the book, I would be totally lost. And it's hard because I can't prove that, right? I mean, that because it's hard to vacate what you know of the book. And so, but anyway, that was definitely happening throughout this film, where I was like, what would I even think this
if I had
story was? I mean, because it was so disjointed. There, I mean, so many of the elements of the portions of the film, were so disjointed.
I was wishing that I had planned this week a little bit better, because I set aside this afternoon to watch it, and my husband has never read nor seen any of the Narnias.
Okay.
Which is ridiculous because he's a total geek, fits right in with all of us, but somehow that has escaped him.
Right.
And I was thinking about it, like, you know, he came and joined me for like 15 minutes and was just talking about the technical stuff, and I was like, oh, I should have started this at the beginning just to kind of see like if someone could pick up on what the actual overall plot stuff is, because same thing, I was thinking, like, if you just sat down and watched this, I don't think it would track. Like,
yeah,
you're missing out on just the joyous adventure spirit, just to adventure, and replacing it with something that doesn't give me enough to care about.
There were so many times at the end of the film, especially, when I was like, so the island is defeated, the Neville is gone somehow for some reason.
And I have no confidence that it's actually gone.
Because I don't know why it was there in the first place.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because maybe it just went back to its magic lamp in the bottom of the ocean.
Or
I don't know
why the placing of those 7 swords on that table would do the trick.
Why are those swords magical? How did that happen?
I loved the fact, and again, I'm trying to forget the book. Lucy, like when they're in the Dark Island at the end, right? Lucy is like praying to Aslan, and we hear her like internal prayer in voiceover, and then we see the albatross come in, and that's it. We never return to the albatross, and it never does any. I didn't catch it anywhere else. So it's just like that got completely dropped. Like, we saw this albatross and we have no idea why. Like, it was like Chekhov's albatross that never did anything, right? In the story. Anyway, okay, but all of that is done. Right, so we've somehow, the Neville has been apparently defeated.
Sorry, I know typing is annoying. I was just answering these questions.
Okay, yes. We've defeated the Neville. The next shot is of them sailing or rowing a small boat into the Sea of Lilies, into the Silver Sea, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, why? Where? What happened?
What's the reason for
Why
this?
are we going anywhere?
Yeah,
Who?
and this is okay.
Why are they in a
I
boat and
I
not the
seriously
ship?
thought that I thought I had missed something. I was like, wait, did I get up? Did I miss a scene somewhere? I
Yeah.
didn't understand what was happening.
No. No.
I think I've got one of that somewhere. Just that.
Oh, just that, yeah. And then
Yeah.
so and then, but it was this whole series of. So then they got, and so it's the Pevensies and Eustace and Reepicheep and Caspian,
Yeah.
who are in the boat, and okay, so then they get here to a beach with a standing wave on it, and the standing wave is kind of cool.
It looks great.
The visuals in this film are awesome.
Visuals are great,
They're astounding. All of the visuals
but
in this film.
there's such a difference between this powerful wave and the soft gathering of white light around Reepicheep that everything about that scene to me was just soft and sweet and beautiful. Whereas this feels, I don't know, not jarring. It's like the opposite of jarring, like pushing.
Lewis describes a wave. Their choice to depict it as a breaker which never breaks is a
Yeah.
really interesting,
Yeah.
and I found jarring adaptation choice. Because, of course, one of the differences in the book, there isn't a beach. Like, the water gets shallower and shallower,
Yeah.
but there's not, like, they don't walk onto sand, right? And the water goes straight up, and then it goes up over. It's like a hill. Like they see Reepicheep go up the slope of the wave and
Yep.
then over it. But again, it's not a breaker. It's not described as a breaker like this, and it's certainly not a breaker on land like this. But again, so okay, so now so they beach the ship on the beach, and they're like, "What is this land? Who knows? Where are we? I have no idea. Why are we?" And then Reepicheep is like, "I must go on," and I'm like, "Really? Okay, all right." Thinking only of the film, you did mention that once, an hour and a half ago. So
Yeah.
if I have a very retentive memory, I will in fact recall that you want to go into the uttermost east.
Which is fine, but then I would also be like, but you are also the most loyal and virtuous character throughout this entire thing, and the last thing you would do is abandon your king and your ship. So unless there was this really specific statement that one of your party must be left behind, and he valiantly volunteers like he does in the text,
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No,
that doesn't work.
it seems almost like just like this unexplained pivot in Reepicheep's character. And then even small things. He like gets out his little wicker coracle
Yes.
out of
You're
the
like, where
boat.
did
And I'm
that
like,
come from?
what? Like, I mean, again, book, I'm not surprised. But if I had never read the book, I'd have been like, what is the mini boat? Where did they get
Yes.
Reepicheep's mini boat? Like, what on earth is happening there? And then even when he goes up, Reepicheep goes up, like, we see, look at the wave. It's like,
Yeah,
like
he goes up
he
vertical.
goes
Like,
like, what did he go around upside down and then over like that? Like, how did
yeah.
that even work?
It's
You
just
know?
all these practical questions that, again, aren't deal breakers,
Yes.
but they're distracting. So
Yes.
if you keep giving me these things that don't make sense, you are weakening the strength of your film. If you're giving me these things that distract me into how this is going to function, where did that boat come from? Why are we on a sandbar? I'm not in the moment with this story
Yeah.
because I don't understand why we're here. So, like, carry us to this location and maybe we'll care.
Yeah.
But we haven't been carried. We've been kind of like abandoned.
Yeah. And then Aslan shows up. And they're like, "Oh, hey, Aslan."
Oh, hey.
I mean,
No.
like, it was such a strange, not big deal that Aslan showed up, right? Yeah. Anyway, so JJ, I was gonna talk about that. JJ's quote in the text. So there is land out there, but okay. So the whole point is that they're sailing into the uttermost east, right? And so they take the Dawn Treader, and there's this current. There's this current that heads into the east, and they ride the current and they're taking soundings until the water is too shallow for the Dawn Treader to go forward anymore, and then they have to go forward in the boat, right? So then, and that's when the fight, where Caspian wants to go but he's not allowed to go. That's when that happens, and so then in the boat, the ship's boat, that is, like the like lifeboat, but it's the ship's boat, right? They go off. That's when Eustace and the Pevensies and Reepicheep continue on the boat until the boat runs aground, because the water's like super, super shallow now, but the current is still there. And then Reepicheep gets in his coracle and he continues on and he sails, like, well, not sails, he paddles, floats really, on the current up to and then over the top and then down, right? They get out of the boat because it's like super shallow. It's like a foot deep at this point. That's why like even the boat can't go any further. And then they go sideways. So there's like the straight eastward path, and they go off the eastward path. And when they do, they find land over there. But again, what I found jarring here, thinking again back to that overall purpose, it's like you totally missed a beach. Visually, like, look at this picture. A beach is a frontier.
Yeah.
Right? A sandy beach is a frontier where two things meet. What is meeting here? Like, what is this place? You know, by making the whole width of it, like you come up and you dead end onto a beach, onto this like sandbar that blocks the thing, and then you've got to like carry the coracle across and then somehow defy physics to go over this thing. You know, that's it fundamentally misses like what the Uttermost East is about, you know, and that thread of the Dawn Treader goes as far as it can go, the boat goes further and as far as it can go, and then Reepicheep and his coracle goes, you know, the final step and over the wave. Like, that is such an important concept. That's the culmination of the story. Like, and the quest is achieved. The quest is achieved. And by the way, the spell is broken. The spell, I mean, there is a disenchantment, not just a, you know, not a defeat of the Nevil, but a disenchantment, the waking up of the three last lords, right? And it's achieved at that moment. Like, it's when you get to the east, it's when you achieve when you do the thing. And this film, again, I won't say they don't understand it, but I will say this film doesn't get it. This film doesn't show that. This film shows very little interest in this story.
And I can see like what they came up with was interesting. Great. You've got magic swords to defeat an evil, but that's not the point. You know, and that's just the shame of like, I can't say I hated this film. It was just, what a shame. Oh,
it
bummer.
is a shame. This is a film that deserved. There's so, and I think back to conversations we've had so many times of like how many people were involved, right? Yeah. And there are so many, a huge percentage of the people involved in making this film did an amazing job. Like, there is so much that is good about this film. Yeah. The visuals are incredible. Especially visually. But even just saying the visuals are incredible, like, that's like many teams that did an incredible job. Like, the visual designers did an amazing job. The prop builders, the set builders, the ship is gorgeous. Yeah. It's perfect. It's awesome.
I was thinking that even with this, like, just look at the costume. Like, they all have those similar belts, but different shirts that distinguish them. Like, there's so much going on in these, like, tiny little nuanced things.
Costuming was good. Computer effects were good. The dragon was pretty good. Even relatively understated things like the Minotaurs were really good. This was like the best Minotaurs I've ever seen.
I genuinely couldn't decide if the Centaur was CG or if that was a man in costume. Right. I was like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. No, there were a lot of really cool. Again, both the design, both the concept and the execution of almost everything that we see, whether it be, again, costuming or props or the design. It was so good. It was so much that was good about it. The acting, like,
it was great.
I liked it. I mean,
it didn't distract me, you know? Like, no. Lucy drove me crazy in the first one, and by this one, I like her. She's good. We're good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I also forgot to mention my absolute favorite special effect is the water coming from the picture in the opening.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I want to like commission an artist to paint that exact picture and hang it in my guest room just to freak people out. Like, it's so good.
Right. Though again, in what seems like a little synecdoche of the whole problem with the film, the ship is too small. It's like an ocean picture with a tiny little ship, and they look at it, and like I almost said aloud, when Lucy delivers a line. It's not the exact line in the book, but it's like the line in the book. It's such a Narnian ship.
Such a Narnian ship. And you're like, what are you looking
at?
at?
And I'm like, really? Yeah. Like, how can you tell? It's like,
yeah,
it's tiny. It's like the size of a beetle on that picture. But in any case, it's, from the beginning, I had a hard time with Eustace. But here I know I've been influenced by Pauline Baines's illustrations in the book, which always depicted Eustace as having black hair. So like my picture of Eustace in my head, influenced, I'm sure, by Pauline Baines, was always of him being a sort of not small and squirty, but sort of tall and awkward and gangling and skinny and pimply, pale dark-haired kid. Like that's the picture that in part supported by the text, in part my own imagination, in part influenced by Pauline Baines's illustration. And so the reduction of Eustace to like a small statured blonde kid was jarring for me at first, like, because it was just, and this is one of those things that, like, I don't blame the film for this. Like, it's not the film's fault. They don't have to follow Pauline Baines, for one thing, and secondly, notice what they were following was the BBC adaptation, who also had a small blonde Eustace, a short blonde Eustace. So they, in the film, they had two visual predecessors. Right. And they chose to adhere to the film one instead of the illustrations one.
Yeah.
Which is totally defensible.
And appearance is one of those just pitfalls that it's just, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, you have to be aware of the influences going into it, but you 100% have the ability to change cast. The news
totally
is a black man. We have all these different things of like colorblind casting, and you absolutely can change the characters, but you have to be aware that might be jarring to certain people. So it's one of the things I tend to tell my students too, of just try to not picture going into the film exactly what everyone should look like, because it won't happen,
Right.
But it is tough when your expectation is not met by what is on the screen.
No,
people threw an absolute fit when Harry Potter had blue eyes instead of green, and it's gonna happen.
And that is an example of where it's a repeated plot point that he has his mother's eyes, right? And so, you can see why people would be really upset about that. Mm-hmm. That is one of those things with an adaptation that is always, it has a disproportionate influence on reception. Like on any individual person's reception. The jar of imagining, especially a character, looking a particular way, and then what you're seeing is very far from that. It's hard to overcome. And yet, it's not wicked. Like, that's not a failure in itself. Even if it may make the entire adaptation a failure for you. Now, I'm not saying that did that like because I struggled with small blonde Eustace, that made the whole thing a failure. But I remember watching it for the first time. It took me half the movie before I totally got over it. I would do this internal twitch every time it went to Eustace, and like that part of me in my head, which is like, that's not Eustace. That's not what Eustace looks like, right? That's hard. That's hard. But again, that's a bad reason to condemn an adaptation, because I can't expect a filmmaker to like read my mind and project onto the screen exactly what I've always pictured is a little bit too much to ask. I had the same problem with The Lord of the Rings. It's funny because there's so many people, of course, who grew up on the films now, and for whom it's like, I still to this day get annoyed when people do fan art, which they call Aragorn, when it's a picture of Viggo Mortensen.
Viggo Mortensen.
I'm like, no, just say, like, I did this picture of Viggo Mortensen. Don't tell me you did a picture of Aragorn if it's a picture of Viggo Mortensen. Like, it's just like it's Viggo Mortensen. Like, which is fine. But I didn't love Viggo Mortensen at the beginning. Like, I struggled for half a film.
I'm like, oh, but
again.
Corey, that's some people's Aragorn.
I know it is, and I get that, and I don't condemn anyone who. And I've gotten used to him, and he's fine. But I had a problem with that. I had a problem with Legolas. Like while everyone was fanning out about Legolas, I was like, whatever. Okay.
You know?
I mean, it's Frodo. Again, Frodo was not, a teenager in my head. He was 50. So that was my imagination from the book.
Lucy in the BBC one, absolutely not. She's supposed to be teeny tiny and squeaky and demure. I don't know. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway,
even Ben Barnes. I mean, Caspian's supposed to be like 13. So
yes. Yeah, no, exactly. That was a challenge. That was a challenge as well. Yeah. Anyway, we should go.
We should wrap up. But isn't this an interesting one? I feel like we're still just scratching the surface. We didn't even talk about the opening. Like, there's still a lot of stuff that I think could be a lot of fun talking about with this. But yeah, this is a really good example of a poorly done adaptation, but I'm not going to say like a wrong one. It's just missed opportunity one.
Missed opportunities, yeah. And I think clearly that it isn't even just that they, so to kind of come back to the overall conclusion, I do think this is an example where this fails as an adaptation in large part because they didn't, not just because they didn't retain the core of the original, but because they didn't even replace it with anything coherent. What they replaced it with was incoherent. And that was a huge problem.
If they'd replaced it with something that I could get on board with, I would have seen this again. Ready Player One, totally different than the text. Very different, execution of a lot of different stuff. I love both and have watched that film so many times because it's comfort food.
Right.
You and I have never watched this film again.
Right. Never.
We're the target audience, and we only watched it in the cinema.
Yes.
And I love these books, and I love these adaptations. And the first one I watched a dozen times and listened to the soundtrack for a year. Don't even have any recollection of any of this landing with me. So yeah. Crazy.
Yep. Exactly. All right. Well, we should wrap up.
There's our summary.
There's our summary. Yeah. I really do think it would have been a better film had they kept to the core of the original. Had they kept to try to do the sailing into the East without having sailing into the East be the story. It was a huge mistake from which they never really recovered. And I really, so yes, again, it's not that like, it was wrong and therefore bad, right? It's not quite as simple as that. And yet I do think this is a pretty clear example where a little bit more attention to the core of the original would have made this film a much better story.
It wouldn't have taken much for it to get to the level of acceptable.
Yep.
It would have taken a fair bit of work for it to be good.
Yeah.
But it was achievable, and it just missed the mark.
And it had so many good elements. Apart from, the narrative and the story, apart from the story, it was really good.
And the pacing and the,
Yeah.
Besides that,
it was excellent. All right. Yeah. Very good. Well,
we are here next week. We don't know what we're doing yet, but we are here next week.
That's it.
Yeah.
Next week will be we may have we've been discussing the possibility of doing some anticipatory discussion. We've been looking at old stuff recently, so thinking about some adaptations to come is what we're thinking about for next time. So we will see. Anyway,
that was a nice vague little hint. I like it.
Exactly.
We might return to some of our faves looking ahead.
Exactly. Very good. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Take care, guys.
Bye now.
Bye.